Good morning. It is a beautiful day. Yesterday was a very deep share, and as I was reflecting about whether or not I was to post it, whether or not I was going to share that, I was really reflecting over some of the things that came up. And so today, I actually want to talk about shadow work, because I think that we can use the term shadow work, and it might sound like something scary, but for me, shadow work is a really beautiful process that takes you into the dark places. It takes you into the hidden places. A shadow is something that's always with us, and it depends on where we're standing in the light, whether we can see the shadow or not. But we can always position ourselves to see our shadow. And sometimes, a lot of times, it is helpful to have a trusted advisor, confidant, friend to help us look at our shadow, to provide us with some clear mirroring. So, yesterday, again, I was sharing about my experiences with what I will talk about as fear-based doctrine, fear-based religion. And what came up was that there are some emotions tied to what I learned at that time. So fear, shame, and doubt, which was not one that I recognized came from that experience. But as I began to do some shadow work, do some diving into my own share yesterday, it became evident to me. So these are some themes that appear many times in my life, a lot of times, and they're very strong themes. And so I won't say that they all stemmed from this experience that I had with fear-based doctrine, but I will say that that experience was to help me to release fear, doubt, and shame. That these seem to be themes that have come up in my life that I get to gain self-mastery over, right? So when we experience something, well, let's go here first. First, I want to say that we are energetic beings. We're spiritual beings. We're having a physical incarnation. And that makes us physical beings as well. We have a physical body. We have an energetic body, which is connected to all things, which is connected to our source. That is our spirit. And then we also have an intellectual body. That is the body of our mind, the things that we know, the things that we've been taught, the things that we've caught from just living life, what we've seen and how we've internalized that. And then we have an emotional body as well. And that emotional body, it records and it connects to the things that we've seen, the things that we've experienced, and it records an emotional signature to certain things. So I remember being younger and telling my mom that I was feeling something, but it felt like it was hidden under a bunch of other emotions. At any given time, we can actually experience more than one emotion, but there's often a dominant emotion that kind of covers the other ones, and if we're not aware, if we're not in tune with ourselves, we may not recognize the other underlying emotions. And so our emotions are an interesting part of our body because our emotions are not visible, but they can manifest visibly. An emotion, the feeling of sad, isn't a visible energy. But what does sad look like? What does sad embodied look like? So an emotion of fear is a thought, is a emotion, and it is made manifest in our physical bodies. So our emotions actually can control our physical being without us being aware of it, right? We don't have to tell ourselves to frown because we're sad or cry because we're sad. We don't tell ourselves to cry. That is our physiological response. That is just what happens when the emotion is present. The emotion informs our physical being. So our emotions are really important for us to understand. Our thoughts are really important for us to understand. And how these events, how these emotions direct our actions. We have to recognize that our thoughts and our emotions have our ability to instruct our physical bodies on what to do without, I don't want to say without our consent. We have to be mindful. We have to be aware of how our emotions and our thoughts are causing us to show up. So fear has been a big theme in my life. There was the fear of death, right? And the fear of death can keep us from doing a lot of things. Right now, there's been a lot of challenges with airplanes. There's a lot of talk about issues with airplanes and flying, and there have been a couple of crashes lately. And I remember as a child being fearful of flying and my mom saying it's safer than driving a car. What does that do? It actually could make the fear switch from flying to driving a car. It doesn't speak to the fear. It just addresses the particular concern at the moment. So now someone who might have been fearful of riding an airplane, might now be fearful of driving a car. As humans, we are fearful. Fear is a very powerful controller. There are many people right now who will not fly because they are afraid that something is going to happen to them. Now let's talk about shame. You know, there used to be this saying, shame on you. Shame on you. You did something wrong? Shame on you. We place our beliefs about how people should act, how people should be and behave. And we will inflict guilt and shame upon them if they are not acting in a way that we deem as appropriate or that society has told us is appropriate. Now, these emotions that I'm talking about, they actually are at the center of the cycle of socialization. Fear, doubt, shame, guilt. These are all mechanisms that are used to control people. This is how we keep systems of oppression working. You know, we come into this world and we are influenced immediately by our parents, by those who raised us, those who are closest to us. They teach us what they already believe about the world. They teach us that the world is the way that it is, and we have to fit into it. So think about, what were you taught at these early stages of your life? I love my dad, and he is such a protector. His job was to keep us safe and to provide for us, and he took that really seriously. But in a world that is so unpredictable, that is really difficult to do. And so it's a joke that we have about, you know, we weren't allowed to be on the monkey bars. We weren't allowed to go on the seesaw because, you know, somebody could jump off and then you hit your chin, or you bust your mouth open and lose teeth. There was a lot of concerns that he had, and he wanted to keep us safe. And I love that about him. And I love him for it. And in many ways, it created some fear, or maybe even doubts about what was safe and what was not. And so then we learn from society. Schools indoctrinate us. They teach us about things. I remember saying to my mom, I was listening, I think it was about a war or something, and I was really afraid. And I said, what happens during war? And she told me, oh, don't worry, it never happens here. It happens in other places. Like, it won't happen in our country. It was this false sense of safety that I kind of had about how safe I was here, because this wasn't a war-torn country, but that there was war in other places. And so it creates this belief of safety. We learn in school about wars, and, you know, when we listen to those stories, those wars are really about land and resources, and fighting over those, the land and the resources. Excuse me. And one of the things that we don't learn is, how could we have not gone into war? We're actually taught that war is necessary. It is a necessary evil. And it is okay for it to happen other places, but it will never happen here. That was something that I learned. We never teach children what could have been done to avoid this war. You don't realize, I think as a child, that war means that people died, that there were mass casualties. You just think that war was a fight, and whoever won the fight won the war. So we sanitize things like war. And so when we are shown the opposite, when we're shown that war does happen, where civilians are harmed and people die, we question whether that's real or not. We have doubts of whether that is true or not. I don't, but I think as a society we do. We learn all of these things, but when we question, when we have thoughts about, well, what does this mean, and who was right and who was wrong, we very quickly learn that we're not supposed to ask questions, that we're not supposed to doubt the authorities. And so what does that teach us? It teaches us to doubt ourselves, to doubt the questions that arise in our minds and in our hearts and in our emotions about something that we know is wrong, that we feel is wrong. And that teaches us to doubt ourselves. And it also reinforces that we be fearful of questions, because when we ask questions or when we stand up and speak differently than the crowd, we are punished. That fear is anchored into us through this practice of enforcement of our wrongdoing and asking questions and doubting systems that are unjust. And what we can choose next is to fall in line, or we can listen to the wisdom that is coming up within us. I believe that our emotions are wisdom. They are not to be bypassed. They are to be welcomed and also observed. What are they trying to teach us? What are they trying to show us? What are we no longer congruent with? What are the things that we need to really sit with to understand ourselves more? What are the bad feelings that we're experiencing, and why does it feel so bad? Why are we fearful? Why are we doubting? So this is what shadow work is. Shadow work is about leaning into the wisdom of the emotions and the thoughts, what we've been taught and what we've caught, and seeing what wisdom they're teaching us. How can we expand into a greater awareness? So one of the things that I was observing yesterday was my anger and my frustration towards a system, a religious system, that I felt was willfully withholding information. I was talking about how they'll talk about something all the way up to a certain point, and then it's like they hit a wall and they leave it there, they back down. And I was so annoyed and frustrated and resentful. And as I sat with those emotions, as I observed my shadow, I recognized that, one, I was in a form of judgment. And that form of judgment was a belief that they knew more, that they actually knew something was on the other side of the wall. There's this, I'm reminded of a movie called The Lorax. And these people lived inside these huge walls, and they were told not to go out. They never saw a real tree, and in fact, they didn't believe that trees were real. And so they had these plastic trees. And a young man wanted to learn about the trees. And so one night he crept outside of the walls of the city. I mean, these people were so caught up in a way of being that because there were no trees, they had to pay for air. They had to pay for air. It's funny. It reminds me, like, when bottled water first came out, my mom said something about, why are we paying for water? Anyway, so they'd never seen a tree. They were extinct. They didn't exist anymore. And if you haven't seen The Lorax, it's a really cute movie. And I think there's probably a deeper lesson, and one that beyond the one that I'm going to share right now, which is there was so much more beyond the walls, but people had been taught that there wasn't anything out there, that life was inside these walls, and that is where they were safe. That is where all of the answers were. You don't go looking outside of the wall. And so sometimes people are content inside of the wall, or they can't even imagine life on the other side. But then there are those who seek more wisdom, seek to know the history. Why was this wall built? And what is it keeping us from? I think it's important for us to recognize that people are operating within their wall of knowing. But our shadow can be on the other side of that wall. Us knowing more about ourselves is on the other side of the wall. Being willing to expand into more of ourselves is an important thing. So that's what I'm sharing today. I hope you have a great day.